Chaos erupted in Guinea-Bissau after the military seized power just days after the presidential vote, effectively scrapping the election before a winner could be named. Now, armed men reportedly stormed the Electoral Commission, destroyed the computer service, and confiscated the tally sheets, making it impossible to ever know the final results. Now, the junta has already installed a general to rule for the next year, but the international reaction has been sharp. ECOWAS has suspended the country and is pushing hard for the military to back down and restore constitutional order. Now, the personal fallout for the candidates is just as dramatic because the main challenger, Fernando Dias da Costa, barely escaped arrest and is now sheltering inside the Nigerian embassy for protection, while the incumbent President Umaro Sissoco Embaló has fled the country entirely. Now, to make matters worse, there are serious rumors circulating, even among neighboring leaders, that the president might have actually staged this coup himself to avoid losing the election. So it is yet another worrying chapter for a nation that has seen far too much instability and military interference over the decades. Now, joining us to speak more on this, we have Dr. Sam Amadi. He's director the Abuja School of Social and Political Thought. Thank you so much, Dr. Amadi, for joining us at this time.
Thank you for having me. Thank you.
All right, Dr. Sam. Now, how should international observers assess the serious and specific allegations from regional figures? Because even Nigeria's former president, Goodluck Jonathan, has said that the coup was ceremonial or even simulated by the former president Embaló to circumvent a potential electoral defeat.
Well, I think first is that elections are within the domestic policy of countries, and we've not seen several, apart from the period of Cold War and soon after, when the US, the USSR, the hegemons had strong incentive to annex state authorities to the wagon of their foreign policy interests. Otherwise, we've seen elections condemned, by global powers, conditions put, some kind of sanctions, and thereafter, they have not really, gone with diplomacy to install someone who ought to win. So we will expect that this evidence by credible sources who observed the election will build up to the dossier that the election was unfree and unfair, largely, and that will affect the way the international community looks at the regime in power. So that's a given that is going to be that. Then will it be elevated to the point of real sanction and the pressure to return or to conduct a better election or to declare the right winner and then install the person who's going to win the election? So that, I think, may be far-fetched. It always depends on how important that country is, how important democracy, or at least former electoral democracy is to the major powers who have the incentive to, stage, if you like, some kind of a counter-coup, but maybe a civilian one, to remove the junta and put back the president. We've seen some examples of where even West Africa, part of the ECOWAS work build up to the 2020s was, on that line. So for now, I think it's a credible report, but then what to make of it will depend on several factors.
All right, Dr. Amadi, but, given the Election Commission's public statement, that the destruction of the servers and ballot boxes makes an official result impossible. So what basis remains for establishing the legitimacy of any political process moving forward?
It'll be difficult because it means you're going to do a lot of evidence collection. So assuming there are forensic ways of establishing that, even though this evidence has been corrupted, ballot boxes scattered and papers perhaps, can you put them all together? So that makes it actually difficult now to say, what is election? The worst case scenario is perhaps a rerun. But again, the incumbent who probably ought to do that from the report now is in cahoots with the juntas to forestall the outcome. So it will be difficult to recreate a credible electoral result, and that makes that worse. If the result has been maybe declared or results have been out, but no official attestation or certification, the sort that happened with June 12 in Nigeria in 1993, then you can use that result and make a formal declaration or push for international recognition of the winner as the person who ought to be declared winner and build a pressure on that. But at this point, it's difficult to say who actually won. But at the same time, it's clear that there was some arrangement. So the question then is, what can be done? Go back to a raw election, or force the junta out to do a different election, or you ask them to go back and conclude the process and declare the winner. That's really maybe too difficult to have a credible, but maybe something that will be presumptive.
All right, now speaking of the junta, the appointment of General Horton Tam, a known ally of the former president, by the way, as the transitional leader, and the subsequent naming of cabinet largely composed of Embaló's aligned figures. It complicates the whole narrative, doesn't it? Because how does this alignment influence the analysis of whether this was a genuine overthrow or a strategic controlled exit?
The subsequent composition of the government lays credence to what President Jonathan and others have said, because here you got an ally of the outgoing president who didn't like the opposition to win power, puts in, claims a coup, runs away, and then his allies are back in power. So it looks like a palace coup, like President Jonathan said. So the subsequent event, the composition of government, the appointment of these key figures kind of support the case that this was an unusual coup, a refusal of a ruling elite or a ruling political class to concede defeat and then stage a coup to get themselves back to proxy, to rule. So unlike the classical view that we see in West Africa, we have angry outsiders, military guys who are not happy with the political system, destroy everything, throw everybody away, and maybe pretend to be revolutionaries and appoint persons who are either opposed to the regime in power or at least who are not members of political class. But here, a section of the people in power get back in power through a proxy of a coup. So that justifies the fact that this is like a deal. Everything has happened after the coup to justify the suspicion, at least, that the former president basically denied the opponent a victory and allowed the to come in here.
All right, just before we go on a quick break, can you tell us what level of freedom and political space can be expected for opposition figures in this case, such as the PAIGC leader who was arrested, and also Fernando Dias da Costa, who is seeking asylum during a transition managed by a cabinet featuring allies of the ousted incumbent?
Well, the level of freedom is contextual. I mean, if I understand it very well, the level of freedom citizens will have. I think this might be a much less brutal, less authoritarian, military rule, because these are politicians who probably have achieved their purpose to stop their opponent getting to power. And so we might see a diarchy, if you like, where the military is in charge, but maybe the soul will be civilian. And therefore, it will not be that radical like we see in Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger. It might be something that is in action, a civilian government, but in composition and informality, a military government. So you're going to see a form of diarchy in this regard.
All right, well, when we come back after the break, Dr. Amadi, we will speak more on the asylum granted Fernando. Do you stay with us? Thank you for staying with us. We're still talking about the coup in Guinea-Bissau, and we still have Dr. Sam Amadi with us speaking on this. Thank you for staying with us, Dr. Amadi.
Thank you.
It's a pleasure. Now, just before the break, we talked about, one of the presidential candidates, Fernando, being granted asylum by Nigeria. Now, this asylum, right, he also requested ECOWAS security for its embassy as well. I'm talking about the Nigerian embassy requested ECOWAS security. What are the diplomatic and political ramifications of this action on, the delicate balance of neutrality that's required for regional mediation efforts?
Well, very important question. First, of course, the right of asylum is one that is guaranteed, in some sense, under the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. I think Article 14 grants individuals to seek asylum and states to grant asylum on deserving cases, especially persons facing persecution, as long as the issue is not non-political crimes, but prosecution for non-political crimes are not included on grounds of asylum. So a fear of persecution for political related issues are valid grounds for exercise of right of asylum and refugee status. I mean, both the United Nations, even the status related to status of refugees and the protocols all guarantee that right. And the states have also built constitutional law, some of them in their laws, in their various constitutions, China, US, France, the EU, many countries all over the world, including Nigeria, have statutory guarantee for asylum. Now, the political diplomatic issue is very clear. If you grant, people, of course, people who seek asylum first enter the country and then they apply for status of asylum. Now, it's a statement by the granting country that they recognize that the regime, even if it's not legitimate, is exercising some degree of coercion or some degree of unfair prosecution of some group of persons. So, in a sense, it's a conflict situation, even though potentially it may not be actual. So when Nigeria says they're granted the regime in Equatorial Guinea, a opposition leader who was challenging the legitimacy of the government and is now granted asylum in Nigeria, it conveys a sense that Nigeria accepts that narrative. Nigeria sees him as somebody who's been persecuted of a sort. And in a way, it puts Nigeria in a contradictory position to Equatorial Guinea and a fellow ECOWAS. And we have the general African and West African principle is first non-interference. But the EU, the ECOWAS rather, have built protocols on democracy, protocols on elections that allow right to protect and give states the right also to intervene. Don't forget that ECOWAS itself has denounced the coup and has demanded a return to status quo. So Nigeria providing asylum status to a leader of that opposition, it could be interpreted as a furtherance of the fact that ECOWAS rejects this coup, and therefore ECOWAS protects the symbol of the opposition to that coup. So it's in line with ECOWAS commitment, in line with Nigeria's international conventions and support, but obviously a sense of some degree of belligerence and conflict with the junta or the regime in power right now in Equatorial Guinea.
All right, Dr. Sam, let's have your final thoughts just as we wrap up, especially, if ECOWAS proceeds with these sanctions, how should those measures, be structured to specifically target the military leaders and the illicit narcotics trade that fuels this crisis, while also simultaneously minimizing any impact on Bissau Guinea's civilian population?
First, I think the lesson from the three breakaway should inform us that they should be measured. First, I don't even think a military action is actually necessary or required. But first, so they have to be careful not to escalate, and not to push the government far away and belligerent. But again, you have to be firm, but again, respectful, strategic, and phased actions, starting with negotiations, leverage to try to force the junta to get their sense back and move away from where they are, and then increase the pressure and the sanctions. And again, when it's inevitable and politically expeditious to attack or carry out any form of military action, if it's possible, it has to be done in a manner that wins first the support of the people of Equatorial Guinea, because that's what suffered with Mali and Burkina Faso. They support the regime against ECOWAS, then makes it politically more difficult for ECOWAS. So you have to be sure that actions are popular, legitimate, legal, and again, tailored to isolate the members of the cabal, but not cause instability in the region and in the country, and of course not affect innocent persons. So it has to be measured, cautious, and for now much more diplomatic than any form of military action. All
right, Dr. Sam Amadi, thank you so much for your time and for speaking on this.
Thank you.